Welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Today we revisit war in the Middle East between Israel and Hamas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declaring on Saturday the country is at war. Here's what we know so far.
The sound of sirens warning of incoming rocket sounds for several minutes warn Israeli citizens and residents of an imminent attack. Explosions are heard in cities around Tel Aviv and even outside Jerusalem. In the town of Rehovot, fires broke out and smoke billowed after incoming rockets from the Gaza Strip hit the city on Saturday morning. As the morning progressed, it was clear the Palestinian Islamist movement Hamas had launched what will become the biggest attack on Israel in years. The militants infiltrated Israel by land, air, and sea. Hamas military commander Mohammed Deif announced the start of the operation in a broadcast on Hamas media, calling on Palestinians everywhere to fight.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
Hours later, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country was at war. The Israeli military said it had launched airstrikes into Gaza, where witnesses reported heavy explosions. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant vowed that Israel will win the war. The Israeli military said its forces were operating inside Gaza, but gave no details. The Israeli military said it had launched airstrikes into Gaza, where the roar of rockets launches could be heard. An explosion was seen on camera and smoke billowed across the skyline. The attack came a day after Israel marked the 50th anniversary of the 1973 war that brought the country to the verge of catastrophic defeat in a surprise attack by Syria and Egypt. The death toll began to rise as Hamas militants infiltrated Israeli neighborhoods, entering into homes and shooting residents at point-blank range. In the meantime, Hamas' armed wing distributed videos set to show the attacks. Palestinian media also reported that a number of Israelis had been taken captive by fighters, and Hamas media circulated video footage apparently showing a destroyed Israeli tank. Meanwhile, multiple bodies lay on the streets of the southern Israeli city of Sderot. Vehicles on the streets bore bullet holes, and some were still running after the attack. Ambulances, police officers, and members of Israel's armed forces were also at the scene.
Joining me now is the Israeli ambassador to Nigeria, Michael Freeman. Thank you, Ambassador Freeman, for joining me on the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
And I'm sure that you already are getting updates about what is happening back home in Israel. Could you please tell us what is the status of the Israeli forces and the Hamas militants in Israel as we speak?
Well, as we speak, yesterday morning, Hamas terrorists fired approximately 3,000 rockets into Israeli towns and cities across the country. And many hundreds, we still don't know the exact number of Hamas terrorists, came into Israel with the express purpose of murdering and killing Israeli citizens and kidnapping as many as they could. And as of now, we know that over 600 Israelis were murdered. Many of them were women and children. The vast majority of them, 90%, are civilians. We know that over 100 have been kidnapped and taken into Gaza, including children as young as 3 and 4, and elderly people as old as 84 and 85 years old. We are still battling in a number of areas inside Israel, Hamas terrorists who are still there. And we are going to now respond to this declaration of war by this radical terror organization who carried out some of the most heinous crimes that we've ever seen. These are crimes of, as I said to you, shooting families whole families, killing children in front of their parents, abusing the bodies of those who are dead. There are stories of rape, there are stories of all sorts of different things that happened. And so this war that they've declared, we're now going to respond, and we will win this war, and we will deal Hamas a blow that will mean they won't ever be able to do this again.
You have described these horrible, horrific scenes. I don't think we've seen them happen anywhere else in the world. And the whole world is just shocked watching what's going on in Israel. People were sitting in their homes. They've been dragged out of their homes also, as well as, the kidnappings and the rapes that you described. Do you understand how Hamas was able to gain so much access into a country that had such a tight security as such as Israel?
Well, it's one of the questions that we will have to ask, is how this happened, where the mistakes and what we can learn. But that will have to wait. Everything has its place. And that will have to wait until the end of this war, because we've still got terrorists inside Israel. We still have over 100 citizens kidnapped inside Gaza that we need to get back. And, I'm sure many of your viewers have got all sorts of different views about the conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And we can debate that here, we can debate that another time. But this is not about Israelis and Palestinians. This is about humanity. And anybody who comes into a country and does the things that we've seen done by these Hamas death squads, that's beyond any sort of conflict. That's not about Israelis and Palestinians. That's about human values. And, when we see these things happen and these massacres and these things happening, it's really a real tragedy.
Yeah, and the word that comes to mind for me right now is desecration of the Israeli people, which is what Hamas has done in Israel this one full day. The strikes happening overnight from Friday night into Saturday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as you said, has declared that Israel is at war. The Israeli airstrikes have already started. They killed at least 370 people in the Gaza Strip, which is where most of the Hamas militants ran to, as they kidnapped people, Israelis, and moved off with them. Israel has carried out offensives in Gaza Strip over the past few months. It says these raids have been targeted at Hamas militants. Do you believe the numbers that invaded the country really came from Gaza, or they were probably also from other, surrounding countries and cities?
They all came from Gaza. We know for a fact they all came in from Gaza. That's the only access point. They came in through there. They came in a number of different points. They came by air and they came by land. They attempted to come by sea as well, but we stopped those terrorist infiltrations. So they came from those areas, and then, as you said, they ran back to those that were able to, ran back to Gaza, taking with them women and children and bodies and all sorts of different other things, where we've seen some of these horrific pictures on social media of what they've then done to these people. We saw an 11-year-old boy on television yesterday in Gaza being hit and kicked by other children in Gaza, being bullied. We've seen 84-year-old women and 85-year-old women, with some of them with severe Parkinson's, being kidnapped with their carers, being taken into Gaza. It's been horrific, and we know they all came from Gaza. We know they all went back to Gaza, and Gaza is where the problem is with Hamas, and it is about Hamas. It is not about the Palestinians. This is about Hamas. It's about the terror infrastructure, and it's about Hamas and their death squads and making sure they can't do this again.
Yes, and the Israeli government has been trying to draw attention, and even trying to deal with the problem itself of Hamas in Gaza. Could you explain what sort of the type of raids that are going on in the Gaza Strip now as we speak? I know that in the past there were just raids on particular buildings and so on, and the Israeli government says it's been targeting the militants, even though Gazans have been complaining that it's not just the militants who are dying, it has been civilians. So is Israel being careful, with these attacks also in Gaza, so that ordinary citizens are not affected?
We do everything we can to avoid civilian casualties. It's not easy. The Hamas terrorists deliberately hide and put themselves in amongst civilian populations. We know that they hide in buildings. We know they hide in schools. We know they hide under hospitals. That's how they work. They use the civilian population as a human shield. The difference between a normal society does everything to protect your civilians, and the army and the soldiers are in front of the civilians to protect them. In Gaza and Hamas, they put their civilians in front of them. so that they can use them. So we do everything we can to avoid civilian casualties. We give warnings. We do everything we can. Unfortunately, they don't always succeed. And unfortunately, civilians do get killed in these attacks. But we do everything we can to avoid them. And if you look at international commentators and international military experts from the UK, from the US, they will verify that the Israeli army tactics are some of the most careful and the most cautious in the world in order to avoid civilian casualties. That's what we want to do. We know the suffering. We have no interest or no wish to make young, innocent children or women or innocent men suffer in Gaza. What we want to do is target Hamas and target the terrorists and target the terrorist infrastructure.
But how difficult or how easy would it be targeting these militants, knowing that they also have Israelis hostages with them? How do you prevent the deaths of your own people while also targeting Hamas, especially at a time as this?
Look, it's going to be a challenge. You're right. The fact that they've taken these hostages, that they are using them as human shields, that they are hiding behind them, is going to make things very difficult. And I'm sure that our military leaders and our politicians will make the decisions that are necessary. Some of them will be very tough decisions in order to use the tactics. We want to avoid, obviously, the death of all civilians, our civilians, the death of Palestinian civilians, and do what we can. What we've seen in the last 48 hours is that Hamas does everything they possibly can to kill civilians. Whilst we try and avoid civilian death, their aim, they are glorified by killing civilians. And that's the fundamental difference. And when you're fighting against an enemy whose aim is to kill and to massacre and to humiliate, it means there are definitely challenges, but we will overcome those challenges and we win. We're facing a very difficult moral dilemma, as you highlight, but we will do what's necessary to win this war and to save our people.
There have been reports of major Israeli cities being targeted in these strikes. Over 7,000, beg your pardon, airstrikes hit Israel within those 10, 15 hours or so. The U.S. has warned other countries sympathetic to Hamas not to take advantage of the situation. Do you think that's a possibility, and what might that look like?
Well, we know that Iran is behind Hamas. They sponsor Hamas. They fund them. They provide them with weapons. They provide them with funding for weapons. And Iran also sponsors and funds Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also funds and sponsors various groups within Syria. So that's obviously the risk. And we would make it very clear to everybody outside, whether that's in Lebanon or whether that's in Syria, that we have no interest in a wider conflict. We do not want other countries to get involved. If other people do decide to get involved, then we will fight that battle as well, and we will win on that front as well. But this is all about Iran. This is all about the forces of evil, the forces of radical extremism, doing everything they can to stop any hope of peace, to stop any hope of safety and of a change in the region. And therefore, that's what they're acting and how they're acting.
Ambassador, will Israel be seeking support, military or otherwise, from allies at this time, especially the United States, which has declared support once again for Israel? And we're looking at, an array of countries, Germany, the UK, and all these other countries also declaring their support for Israel at this time.
Well, over 64 countries have declared support for Israel. And I think that every country in the world, and as the picture becomes clearer, I think every country in the world that values decency will condemn what we've seen over the last 48 hours. They will condemn the terrorism. They will condemn the brutality. They will condemn the massacre that took place, and they will condemn the kidnapping. We know other countries have had their share of kidnapping by radical extremists. We know what that's like, and so we're looking for support to make clear who Hamas are. We're not looking for any military support. We have our own army. We will look after ourselves and we will fight as we need to with our civilians. Hundreds of thousands of Israeli reserves, we're a reserve army, have been called up in the last 48 hours. And we will do what's necessary. But we want all decent countries to make clear that what Hamas did yesterday was unacceptable, that it's unacceptable in a civilized world, that it's unacceptable in a decent world, that there can be no justification for the pictures that we've seen. This is not about Palestine and Israel. This is not about land. This is not about any dispute. This is pure evil brutality.
The Nigerian government is also released a statement regarding the situation in Israel. The statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says it's deeply concerned about the outbreak of hostilities between Israel and Hamas. It's appealing to both sides to address these issues even more differently and more calmly. What sort of impact do you think that messages like these have on the Israeli government? What do you think when you hear countries appealing to both sides, not particularly taking any side in this?
Well, I understand the want and the desire for people to have a peaceful region, but this particular issue. There are no two sides to this. There is one terror organization that massacred Israelis. Young people who were at a peace festival, a music festival called the Peace Festival. Over 150 of them were massacred whilst they were there, just shot while they were dancing, killed in cold blood. We've seen a family whose daughter was shot in front of them and left to die, and then they slowly shot the rest of the family. This is not about two sides. Bodies that have been mutilated, bodies that have been assaulted, bodies that have been defiled. This is not about two sides. This is about condemning clearly the evil that took place, condemning clearly the massacre that took place, and condemning kidnapping. And afterwards, we can have a conversation about bringing Palestinians and Israelis together to have a conversation and to try and bring peace forward. But the most important thing to do and to understand is that Hamas have proven themselves yesterday. They can have no future or any part in any peace process or any discussions. These are people who base themselves on brutality, extremism, and defiling the human body.
What's even more incredible, Ambassador, is the fact that this is happening during a Jewish holiday, the Yom Kippur. The Jewish holiday holding at this time. And I know that this also happened about 50 years ago, was the last time, almost 50 years ago, was when Israel also experienced an almost similar attack, from Egypt and I believe Syria at that time. People are trying to make comparisons as to maybe the Israeli military was relaxed at this time. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is known to be, I don't want to say a war leader more often, more like it, a war leader, this sort of like slipped, escaped, his notice, how this all happened, and it's all happening under his watch. Is there a blame game here that people think that somehow the Prime Minister should take responsibility for what has happened?
No one's talking about a blame game at this point. What we're focusing on is making sure that we win this war, about protecting our citizens. At this moment, there are still fights going on inside Israeli towns and communities. Terrorists are still killing Israelis at this moment inside Israel. And so we're doing everything we can to make sure that terrorists are taken care of, that we can make sure that our borders are secure.
Is there a sense of a timeline for this war, or it will be a fight to the finish?
I don't know that there's a timeline, but as you said, we've got over 100 civilians who have been captured and they're not been kidnapped and are in Gaza. And we've got a terrorist infrastructure that we need to destroy, because otherwise, if we don't do it now, then in 6 months' time, we'll be in the same place again, or in 8 months' time, or in a year's time. And so I fear that this may be a longer war than we would like. Obviously, war is never a good thing, but sometimes you have no choice when you're faced with pure evil, which is what we faced over the last 24, 48 hours. When you're faced with evil and depravity, then you have no choice but to fight that war, and that's what we're going to do.
Ambassador Michael Freeman, thank you so much for speaking with us. We do understand how difficult a time it is for you even to have to go through, what happened over the weekend with us, but we appreciate your time. We also appreciate, you having to explain to us what's been going on in Israel. And we do hope that, peace is restored in Israel, and that Hamas also understands exactly what it has done, and everything works out well. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Thank you very much indeed.
I got in touch with Omaka Osakwe, a resident of Tel Aviv, to get a sense of what happened in Israel over the weekend. Joining us now is marketing and technology expert Omaka Osakwe. She joins us from Tel Aviv, one of the cities targeted by Hamas militants. Omaka, thank you for joining us on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
And it sounds pretty quiet where you are for now, but I know that the last few hours, at least the whole of Saturday, must have been really terrifying for you. Describe to us what was going on when you knew that this was more than a military drill, that this was more than, anything out of the ordinary that was going on in Israel.
Absolutely. So when it actually started, it was about 6:30 in the morning, and we're outside in Tel Aviv. We just left the club. We heard the sirens because Israel has a security system in place that notifies the residents of when they need to enter a bomb shelter. And what had happened was we heard the sirens, but we're not really sure what was going on. And so we had to go hide in a stairway of a building until someone clarified to us that actually there's rockets. Within moments, there were videos. My dad had sent me links of videos of Hamas terrorists coming into the country on trucks, from the sky, from the sea. And, we just had to do our best to scurry away and find a way back home. Since then, it's been really restless. The entire country has been through so many horrific incidents, attacks left, right, and center. People being holed up in their houses, the terrorists infiltrating people's homes, taking over, shooting men, women, children, taking some hostages, raping them, as you mentioned earlier, literally defiling dead bodies. It's just been a complete nightmare. And, we're all just waiting to see what's going to happen. Everyone has no idea what's coming. And I think that uncertainty is really taking a toll on everyone because, they don't know what they need to do. What we've done is literally stock up on, so many groceries just to make sure that in the case we have to stay in, we have access to food.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask about that. How much of an access you have to stocking up before things actually get worse. But in Tel Aviv, there were rockets flying all over the place. When you're just one of the few who was able to escape, not being hit, but I know that neighborhoods were being hit. There were reports of Hamas militants on the ground entering into houses, as you might rightly mentioned. But in where you are, did you actually witness any of the atrocities being committed? Did you witness, Hamas entering into homes and, what was really going on the ground?
So the actual infiltration of homes was happening more towards the south of the country and more towards the area that's right around the Gaza Strip. Because Tel Aviv is more central, we were more hit by the rockets. And so I actually heard, all the booms and the slams of the rockets, people running to their different shelters. Luckily, each home or in close proximity to every home, there has to be a bomb shelter. And that way there were not a lot of casualties as far as I'm aware from the actual rockets. I do have a bomb room within my apartment. So me and my family were able to just go in whenever there was an alert. And the other thing I really felt like I should bring up is actually that the infiltration is one thing and the rockets are another, but also because there's lots of Israeli Arabs who are citizens of the country, there's been so many scenarios where they're actually starting to commit all these activities. And so throughout today, I know there have been various arrests that have been made at some individuals who are trying to carry terrorist activity within other areas of the country.
Omaka, thank you for speaking with us, and do stay safe in Tel Aviv.
Thank you so much for having me. I hope you have a lovely day.
This is where we end the program this week. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.